When The Matrix came out at the turn of the century, it was a cultural phenomenon. For the masses, this is mostly because it had slow motion but with bullets. But for the intellectually curious, it became a philosophical renaissance. You see, The Matrix is basically Plato's allegory of the cave, told through a modern cyberpunk setting. And for an entire generation, it was basically an introduction to existential philosophy 101. But more than that, The Matrix tapped in to a cultural, subconscious feeling many of us had that something is wrong with our reality. It led us not just to question institutions and authority, but question the entire picture, the entire story that we are constantly being told about the world we live in. To this day, many of us still feel like there's something wrong with the reality we're being presented with. It feels stifling, disharmonic, modern yet obsolete, and insufficient. Why is so much of what is considered normal seem so inhuman? Well, what if I told you that the very thing that enables consciousness and intelligent life is the same thing that eventually forms the walls of the prison of our minds?
Are you afraid?
So, you can continue thinking that you have free will over all aspects of your life and live in blissful ignorance, or you can resign to simple determinism, thinking that everything's just predetermined and you have no control over anything, but somehow you feel better that you got it all figured out. Or you can show a little intellectual courage and come with me to explore a third option. Hello. I forgot my tie. Anyways, welcome to part 4 of our series on free will. So, in the last video, we covered the nature of complexity and emergence to make a very strong case against determinism. But in this video, we're making a case for free will. To do this, we have to navigate a sea of philosophical and semantic ambiguity, because determinism is a very simple idea, which is one of the reasons why I think it's so tempting. Free will, on the other hand, is very ambiguous. It requires defining a whole bunch of terms that we just take for granted and brings to mind some very important questions about us. What is will, anyway? How do we define it as free? And any attempt that we make to answer these questions dives into a swamp of what are we anyway? And where does I begin or end? Or if we are truly intelligent at all, why do we keep doing really stupid things like buying stuff on Temu and doing TikTok challenges? Only a fool would seek to pursue objective answers to such ephemeral and intractable mysteries. And by God, I am that fool. However, to accomplish this goal, we have to lay a lot of fresh groundwork. If you can invest the time and attention, I promise this will tickle the little gray cells and cover some truly fascinating concepts that even if you end up not agreeing with my conclusions on free will, you will find it worth the time to come with me. Let's dive in. As with most of my videos, we're going to start with the simple concepts and then ramp our way up. To begin with, in my last video, we talked a lot about the scientific problems with determinism. The first argument being that it can never actually be proven or validated empirically. However, the simple idea that everything that happens now must be nothing more than a consequence of everything that happened before is just too hard for people to shake, because if not pure coincidence, then what else? What else indeed? You see, there's a concept I hinted at in my last video. It was covered in the article, but I didn't get to it in the video. It's called computational irreducibility. It means that some systems are so complex that the only way we can find out what is going to happen is by simulating them. Again, the game of life being one of those examples. We can't predict what is going to happen, but we can run the program to see what is going to happen. The point of this idea expands to imply then that the only way someone could predict what is going to happen in the universe would be to have a simulation of the universe running at the same time, slightly ahead. Now, for some people, this idea disproves determinism. Because if we can never sufficiently predict the systems of the universe, how can we say they are deterministic? But for others, it proves the idea of determinism, because if, and remember our big word if, we could run the simulation of the whole universe, everything would always happen the same way. Keeping in mind that that if is the primary god of determinism. But here's the thing. If simulating the universe gives us any ability to predict it, then that simulation would also be the progenitor of choice. Because if we know what's going to happen, then we have a choice to change it. Or, in light of events beyond our control, at least alter our behavior in anticipation of it. So now we get to the point I made all the way back in part 1. The capacity for free will is contained in our memory and our imagination. This is because memory and imagination work together to allow us to simulate the world around us. If we can simulate the world, even a little bit ahead of time, then we have a choice to either change it or change our behavior in response of it. This means physically speaking, like physics speaking. Our memories and our imaginations break linear causality. Linear causality being A causes B causes C. But if our minds are able to simulate ahead of time and help us anticipate events in the world, that linear causality is broken because in reality, C is influencing B and A is influencing B. And there's no way from A or C to know what B actually was. I made this point in a little YouTube short as well. Memory is what allows you to collect and form awarenesses of patterns both in the world and with yourself. Imagination allows us to play with those and simulate the world ahead of time. And a good example of this is much like the comeback that you came to in the shower from that argument you had today, and now you know the perfect thing that you'll say next time, because you will absolutely have the exact same argument again, for sure. However, my little example there shows the problem also with memory and imagination. It is an imperfect simulation. When we are young, our simulations suck. They are formed from very little experience, and our imaginations are way detached from reality. When, however, we meet people in life who we would call wise, they are people who not only have an impressive ability to mentally simulate the world around us, but are also capable of imparting some percentage of that ability to others. These are the kind of people who are presented with many opportunities to say, "I told you so," though tend to be graceful enough and also know that "I told you so" never gets a good reaction. Their actions and behaviors can seem eccentric or even foolish at times, but they seem to ride the waves of life like a skilled surfer effortlessly catching the wave to shore. All this is to say that memory and imagination are a double-edged sword. On the one side, memory and imagination are our own pocket universes. The fact that we have even some idea of what our actions will do and the way they will affect the world around us means we have some choice. Determinism only holds as long as nothing changes between cause and effect. But being human means that every day we are given causes to react to, and our memory and imaginations allow us the chance to change how we react. On the other side, Our memory and imaginations are not perfect simulations of the universe. They are flawed, incomplete, and often contradict reality itself. We cannot therefore say that we have complete or pure free will. To the extent that we do not understand ourselves, to the extent that we don't understand the world around us, we cannot act in a way that effectively changes outcomes to any degree other than what would be considered pure randomness. So, in summary, 1, we do not have complete free will, and a lot of our lives are consequences of events that are beyond our control. 2, I'm affirming that we definitely have some free will, and we are given real choices throughout our lives that have a real effect on changing what the outcomes would have been otherwise. And then 3rd, and this is most important, probably the greatest and most impactful choice we have in this life is to learn, grow, and equip ourselves to make better choices. In other words, we can choose to nurture our own free will and get more of it. And in fact, that might actually be the first choice we even have in life. If you can understand that what makes life so precious is that we have some free will and that we can work together and individually to have more, that is the only way the world makes sense. I'm done addressing the what-if determinists, because in the end, it's not that interesting. It is oversimplistic, juvenile pseudo-logic, just to be blunt. I think the more convincing arguments for determinism, and the things that actually motivated me to make this series, are the biological, the neurological, the psychological, and the sociological influences that we have learned over the past couple hundred years that really seem to control our thinking. Because those things go beyond physics. Those things go into our minds and say maybe even our minds themselves, maybe even with memory and imagination, maybe even all of that is still controlled and determined. And that is where I think the real convincing cases and scary things and things that really need to be addressed lie. And so the rest of this, unlike the philosophical mind games, is going to be about addressing the very real influences that we have over our thinking, primarily honing in on the biggest one of all. And being aware of this thing is the first step to gaining a little freedom over it. What is this thing that I'm talking about? Heuristics. At any moment, life presents us with an array of possible actions and choices that we can make. As I covered in my first video, before we even think about free will, we have to factor in 2 conditions: freedom and agency. Freedom being how we refer to our external options for choice, and agency being our internal abilities to act and manipulate the world around us. As freedom grows, the options to move or act in the world increase. As our agency grows, the ability to use those options to our benefit also increases. When combined, those 2 factors produce what is known to mathematicians and computer science majors as a combinatorial explosion. This happens anytime a set of 2 or more conditions or choices combine to create what is literally too many possibilities to compute. This is the fundamental problem of intelligent life, or just intelligence. Any progressive increase in freedom of action combined with covariant factors for deciding on that action will inevitably exceed the processing limit for calculating the best possible action. In simpler English, as your freedom grows, as your agency grows, they will inevitably reach a point where the combination of the 2 produce too many possibilities for actions for you to even consider them all and determine actually the best possible thing. This is for all sorts of reasons. We don't have enough time to make a decision before we have to act. It's just, we struggle to pay attention to think all these things through. or just the pure physical limitations of your spongy thinking blob stuck in your skull.
You know the sound that a fork makes in the garbage disposal? That's the sound that my brain makes all the time.
This is not only true for humans, but for all intelligent life, and especially for computers. Anything that crosses a certain threshold of intelligence will inevitably deal with the reality that reality is just too big to compute. Let me give you a very practical example. Computers learned to play chess pretty quickly, but they struggled to learn to play Go. If you don't know, Go is that thing that you've seen in movies about smart people that you never knew how to play. The board looks like this. Chess has 10 to the power of 120 possible combinations for a game, which is a lot, don't get me wrong. After even just 4 moves, so that's 2 for each side, there are already 197,281 possible combinations. But while these are indeed big numbers, they are not beyond traditional computing to deal with. In 1988, a computer beat Grandmaster Bent Larsen using brute force computing. That means literally having the computer think through every move to determine the best possible move. However, the game of Go is impossible to compute. Even today, Go has 10 to the 10 to the 48 possible combinations for games. After only the first 4 moves, so each player taking 2 moves, there are approximately 9 million different possible combinations of what a game could be, just in the first 4 moves. Go represents a true combinatorial explosion and far exceeds the ability to just brute force your way through it. In order for computers to finally compete with master Go players, developers had to give the computers heuristics to play Go. And we'll get into this more later, but a heuristic is basically a tool by which to remove excess information. This means that the computer does not find the absolute best move each turn with precision, but rather it filters out entire categories of possibilities and focuses on just the most statistically dominant ones. When it finally decides on a move, it is, in a sense, still guessing, just like we do. A well-informed guess, but still an imperfect guess. This new approach led Google's AlphaGo AI beating professional Go player, I'm so sorry if I screw this up, Fan Hui in 2015. One of the heuristics it used was to choose moves with a high probability of winning with a minimal advantage over high advantage moves that had slightly lower probabilities, meaning it played with humility. As competitive humans, we are often too tempted to go for the biggest win possible, but for this humble strategy, the computer led to a 5-0 sweep. Getting back to the point, even something as simple as a game can produce a combinatorial explosion, too large for any intelligence to handle. To survive and adapt to reality, we have to employ strategies to quickly eliminate possibilities and reduce them down to a manageable few. In ancient Greece, this term was heuristics. That's the birth of the term. And it was coined to refer to any strategy our brains have to use to solve a problem where logic is insufficient. Around the 1950s, economies dusted off the term to refer to how humans use mental shortcuts when making buying decisions. You see, they realized that consumers are not perfectly rational creatures, but instead we have these little shortcuts that we do because we're too busy to actually buy things rationally. And anyone who's been shopping knows this is true. Heuristics have been used in computer science to describe algorithms or processes that we employ to deal with incomprehensible data sets. But to be clear, heuristics does not refer to any specific type of algorithm or process. They are a category that refers to any strategy, process, rule, or bias that we use for the purpose of resolving the conflict between limited time and resources and an overwhelming abundance of choices. In other words, heuristics do one of three things. They are either instructions that tell us to focus on something, like the way your body has your mind focus on food when you're hungry. Yummy. They are rules for ignoring things, the way mean girls ignore anyone who's not in fashion. Or three, they are kind of like rules of thumb or, quick tricks that simply skip over lots of details to jump to quick things to make decisions. And that's it. Anything that does any of that is technically a heuristic. While the results of all three are similar, they do have subtle differences. We're not going to get into that just yet. The point is that heuristics are required by any form of intelligence to sustainably interact with the real world because the real world has just too much information to deal with. When it comes to an overabundance of choice, I can think of few examples as relatable as the American superstore / grocery store / high temple of worship to American consumerism. And as my fellow American viewers know, this is one of the small ones. I remember the first time I brought my kids here to teach them how to grocery shop. They each had a list, and their goal was to find everything on that list. The look on their faces was like a deer in headlights. It is truly an overwhelming amount of choices to contemplate working through. And nobody survives an American superstore without a heuristic strategy. For the health conscious, it's made pretty easy. All you do is stick to the fresh produce section. Cilantro, very important. For some people, they're brand buyers, meaning they have their set brands they focus on and they are unwavering. Until that brand gets bought out by private equity and degrades enough to poison them, they are not going to change. For example, our family always buys Nathan's hot dogs. Bun length, nobody likes a short wiener. And some people just let go and give in to the chaos, waiting for their subconscious to just pick something at random and have it jump out at them. Ooh, bagels. But perhaps there is no more quintessential battlefield for the idea of choice than the cereal aisle, which somehow shows up in all of these debates on free will. And that's because people look at this incredibly absurd option of cereals and think of that as an example of free will, which it is not. In his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman identifies two different ways of thinking. He calls them System 1 and System 2. Everything I've been talking about with heuristics falls into the category of System 1. Walking into the cereal aisle, however my heuristics are set up based on childhood preference, familiarity, which colors I like, those things are going to catch my attention on a subconscious, quick thinking level. System 2 thinking, however, is intentional. That's us trying to find the optimum move, like before with the chess computer. That's me carefully comparing the ingredients and calories and prices of these boxes to take an option that I've already kind of quickly narrowed down to maybe 3 or 4, and now figuring out of those, which one is the best one for me to pick. However, again, none of this really has to do with free will, because I'm not buying cereal today. Free will is not about what happens inside the grocery store. Free will is about what happens outside the grocery store. So the problem with the debates inside the grocery store is that they're missing one of the most important things. We get to go home and think about what we've done. If we made the mistake of shopping while hungry, we can stop and think about that. If we bought too much of something that we end up throwing away, we can think about that too. If we bought something thinking it was going to be good and it wasn't, we can question our decisions as to why we bought it. The point is, the thing that makes us so special, or at least one of the big things, is that we have the ability to, in hindsight, with our memories, examine our own heuristics, to ask ourselves, how did I approach that grocery store? How was my mind working? Where were my impulses overriding my good judgment? And we can take the steps to develop new heuristics to approach the same problem we did before. And we develop those heuristics with our imagination. So it's more than just cause and effect, which is why I get so frustrated with this conversation being brought to such a oversimplistic, again, kind of juvenile perspective. This is about the fact that we have the ability to evaluate ourselves. And even if I bought the cereal that I really shouldn't have bought today, I can take steps to ensure that next time I don't, or I buy a healthier cereal. The fact that we have so many cereals does not give us free will, because choice in and of itself is not free will. It is the abundance of choice, the overload of choice, that causes us to have to form heuristics, which then could theoretically threaten our free will, if not for the fact that we have the ability to change them. Hey, I remembered my tie this time. Okay, so you might be thinking, Chris, this stuff on heuristics is kind of interesting, but how does this really tie into the debate on determinism versus free will? Well, let me take a minute and try to tie it together for you. You see, heuristics is actually kind of how we got here. In the time of Simon Laplace and his idea of the Laplacian demon, we didn't really take the idea too seriously. It was not a mainstream idea that this nature of deterministic cause and effect in the physical world had anything to do with the world of the mind. These were two different worlds. You had the material world, and then you had the mental world, or the spiritual world, or the world of consciousness, however you want to think of it. It's only been the last 100 years, give or take, of neurology, psychology, sociology, these experiments that we've run, these observations that we've made, what we've learned about the brain and learned about genetics, that have kind of shaken us. They've shaken us philosophically. They've shaken us existentially and spiritually in all these ways. And so now, for the first time, it really seems plausible that the world of our minds is just another world of collective physical cause and effect. And it's become a much more plausible idea. And so we've had this resurgence of this deterministic thinking, and that's why I'm doing this video series to begin with. Here's the problem. While we have correctly, and I'm not here to debate that, identified our biases, our prejudices, and our predispositions that are, contributed from biology, from genetics, from social influences, from our upbringing, and all these things, we have fundamentally misclassified what it is we are observing. These influences, which we are observing, are not linear chains that all add up and just output a sum. They are heuristics. That is what they are, which is why they all have statistical significance, but none of them can actually completely predict behavior. And more importantly, as I have argued and presented in this video, heuristics are a requirement of intelligent life. In order for us to even function, for us to grow up from babies into adults, we have to have heuristics, because we have to experience reality just a little bit, drip at a time, and awaken our own ability to examine things and rethink things a little bit at a time. It's the only way we can deal with it. So earlier when we were talking about cereal, I mentioned how Daniel Kahneman wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, and he identified two systems of thinking. So we have system one, and that's our heuristics. That's the fast thinking, the just shoving out a ton of information already prejudicially, focusing on only a very few things. And then we have system two thinking, which is the slow, deliberative process. Once we've narrowed down a few options, we start taking that more, complete best action approach of looking at all the data and coming to a decision. But here's the problem. System one is arguably deterministic because it's based on heuristics that we often don't didn't make ourselves. They're part of how we grew up. System 2 is also deterministic in the sense like the computer playing chess. We are simply trying to take all the information and find the best answer. What's missing is what I'm going to call System 3. And System 3 is the fact that we have the ability to become aware of and identify and then change our own heuristics. And that is one of the most special, amazing parts of being a human being. When we go to therapy and we have a breakthrough, what we're usually describing is having a heuristic that lived in our subconscious that was blocking out a whole lot of information that we were just not processing and bringing it forward to the consciousness, and all of a sudden going, oh my gosh, this is how I've been behaving all this time. And you become aware of it. And then you're able to start doing things to change it. When people have a spiritual awakening, this is usually, again, just abstract words that we're using to describe becoming aware of our own heuristics, or simply having a brief moment where we preview reality outside of our heuristic limitations and just become in awe of, oh my gosh, there's so much more out there than I realized. Every time that you find yourself lying awake at night, rethinking that stupid thing you said or did during the day, every time you're driving to work and you're thinking through, I don't like where my life is going, I don't like these behaviors I have, this is a process of us gaining awareness over ourselves and being able to reconfigure the baseline operations of our mind and our thinking. And I admit, not enough people do this. But the fact is, enough people do it, and it is so powerful when we do it that it creates massive change, not only for ourselves, but for society. As I referred to in the cold open, the movie The Matrix really seemed to tap into something that we just deeply related to on a subconscious level. And this feeling that we have of being controlled and manipulated, and somehow everything about our action kind of seems determined, this feeling is heuristics. It's that we socially are really becoming aware of this duality to our existence. The fact that we have to have heuristics in order to survive and enter the world and, cope with reality, but that eventually those heuristics also become kind of our prison warden and that we struggle to escape from. And this internal fight that we have to break free of the thing that initially made it possible for us to function is something that we've just wrestled with. And so I want you to know that it's real, but it's not a conspiracy theory. It's not some kind of Illuminati thing. It's not, us living in a simulation. It's a fundamental part of intelligent life. It is a fundamental requirement of intelligence that we are simply evolving to a point where we are experiencing such an amazing amount of tension with it. But that's where those feelings come from, and that's what it is that is in the back of our mind that's just itching us, that's making us be like, I want to get out of here. We should be excited about it because it means we are truly advancing as a species to just want to shake off our chains and experience reality for all the wonders and all the depth and all the variety that it has to offer. Heuristics are the main exhibit, in my case, that we both have less free will than we initially thought, but also that we have some free will. Because heuristics, by definition, are a controlling factor. By filtering out a ton of information that reality has to offer, that limits our choices. And the fact that we have biological heuristics, genetic heuristics, the fact that we get heuristics from the cultures, the tradition, the religions of our parents and our upbringing, all of these things are a form of control, but they're a form of control that we kind of need as we grow up. But then, as we grow up, we gain the ability to start reflecting and becoming aware of how these things influence us, how they affect us, and we are able to start making changes. So, in the world of complexity and in information science, this is called the feedback loop. And the feedback loop is one of the most important things for any intelligence to learn and to grow. The problem is, when the philosopher René Descartes said, "Cognito ergo sum," I think therefore I am, that created an oversimplistic answer that has not served us well in this modern age. Because it is not purely the act of thinking. We have found that intelligence does not require consciousness. That is one of the things that, it's not just something that AI has proven to us, it's something we've learned since we had calculators. Intelligence and consciousness are different things. What we experience in life is not thinking. The more accurate statement would have been, I think, and then I think about thinking, and then I think I'm thinking too much, and then I worry about thinking, and then I think about worrying, therefore I am. So to sum up, if our minds were nothing more than the product of our heuristics, and then after the heuristics, our analytical thinking, then an argument could be made that even we ourselves are just deterministic systems. But the fact that we have this feedback loop where we are able to examine and change or manage or tweak and basically edit ourselves, this shows that we have a non-deterministic system and that we do have choices about who we are and who we become. It's just that it's a lot harder, it's a lot smaller, and it's a lot more precious than we thought it was. Look, there are still a lot of mysteries about consciousness, and this is not the video to go into all of those. But there's one thing that we know for sure. Consciousness is exhausting. Heuristics make consciousness possible. They make intelligent life possible. But it also becomes the thing that forms the prisons of our minds. Free will is not our default state. It is the exception. Only when our current heuristics fail us, when everything seems to be going wrong and nothing we're doing is working, do we occasionally find the courage to question and rethink those heuristical foundations in our mind. It'll be a nice callback. So the real question that you should be asking is not, do I have free will? The real question you should be asking is, do I want it? Be honest now. If you look at your life, do you spend every waking hour trying to avoid your own thoughts? Are you doom scrolling? Are you seeking entertainment any chance you can get? Are you afraid of the silence, hoping that something will distract you? Is your mind filled with the thoughts of others on radio, TV, podcasts, idiot YouTube influencers? Do you seek out to try new things, to experiment with new behaviors? Or are you mostly consumed with just what you think everyone else wants you to do and fitting in? Are you afraid to look into the void of the unknown and ask yourself what's really there? Because if most of us are honest with ourselves, when we really think, do we want more free will? The answer, most of the time, is truly no. Yoink.